The Commando holds a unique position among the pantheon of light battlemechs. While small in stature and lacking some of the bells and whistles that define many of the other light mechs, the Commando makes up for it by being a nasty little menace. In our eternal struggling match of opportunity cost between speed, agility, defense, and offensive weaponry, the design team at the Coventry Defense Conglomerate decided to lean hard into packing a wallop. The plans for the Commando were first drawn up very early in the history of the battlemech. 2439 kicked things off with the Mackie, but very quickly after that, many of the classic designs we know and love from the 3025 TRO marched onto the scene. This included the Banshee in 2445, the Orion in 2456, and the Archer in 2458. The first few decades of designs focused almost exclusively on heavy and assault designs. So when Andrei Barcalau presented plans for a 25-ton battlemech that could act as a heavy scout, they were on untrodden ground. Work had to progress quickly as the battlemech genie was out of the bottle, and every great house and regional power wanted as many as possible. Though the Lyrans had benefited from early access to the technology, the Draconis Combine and Free Worlds League were hot on their heels, especially after workers on Alarion became disenchanted with the Commonwealth and defected to the Free Worlds League, along with plans for several new Lyran battlemech designs. One of the keys to the Lyran plan to keep their edge was the COM-1A Commando. Anyone who had ever piloted one of the gargantuan battle machines knew the feeling. Sitting atop a minimum of 20 tons of protective armor, myomer, pseudomuscle, and foamed endosteel, all powered by its own fusion reactor, was heady enough, but having all that power move at one's command was even more so, to say the least. And the Nero helmet's feedback loop that used the pilot's own kinesthetic sense almost subconsciously to keep the machine upright and moving smoothly only added to the illusion that one had become godlike. You didn't need the weapons to foster the intoxicating sense of power, though the array of destructiveness available to battlemechs certainly added to the sense of ultimate might felt by the person in the hot seat. Initiation to War, page 81, by Robert N. Charette. In the complicated game of interstellar politics of the 25th century, the Lyrans were quite savvy. As the first production runs of the Commando 1A were distributed within the Commonwealth, jealousy ran rampant. The brand new 25-ton machine was built around a 150 primitive fusion engine, carried 10 heat sinks, and was protected by 5 tons of primitive armor, which provided 53 points of protection. While not able to stand up to heavy weapons fire, it was expected that a Commando's Mechwarrior wouldn't stick around long enough for a heavy mech to take their shot. A Commando 1A carried a single Odin large laser in its right arm, which made up a full 20% of the mech's mass. This provided the light mech with a heavy-hitting weapon that could easily destroy targets of comparable mass with 1 or 2 successful hits. Deployed as a raider and scout, the Commando could cause significant damage and scurry out of the fray before suffering too many consequences. During the campaign on Nox in 2475, the Commando would see its first action, pitted against the Draconis Combine in some of the first battlemech-on-battlemech fights in history. It was during these battles that a serious flaw was noted in the Commando 1A design. Apparently, the arm-mounted large laser contained a flaw in its cooling system which led to unexpected heat buildup outside of design tolerances. It affected the lubricants found within the Commando's left arm, which in turn led to issues with accurately aiming the large laser. The issue became such a detriment to the design that Coventry was forced to rethink the mech's weapons loadout. It turned out to be a blessing, as the next version of the battlemech was to be a big hit. In fact, it did so well that the Commando 1A was quickly rendered obsolete. The need for a fix was a good opportunity for the Commando design team to boost other elements of the battlemech with updated technology. The Commando 2D was built around a new GM150 fusion engine which boosted the top speed of the machine to 97.2 km per hour. This was much appreciated, as mech warriors and light mechs tend to live short but glorious lives, and you want to be moving as fast as possible to make every second of life fun. The large laser was pulled in favor of a more balanced yet also more powerful set of shorter range weaponry. This included a Shannon 6-shooter SRM-6 rack set into the center torso, a Coventry 4-tube SRM-4 pack in the right arm, and the tried and true Hesperus B3M medium laser installed into the left arm. Each of the SRM launchers fed from their own dedicated ton of ammunition split between the side torsos. Those who were disappointed to hear about the loss of the large laser were greeted with the possibility of doing up to 25 damage if the SRM gods were on your side, and that had to help dull the pain a little bit. The downside of that alpha strike while on the run was 2 heat into the red, but that's not much of a problem if you don't plan on sticking around more than a couple of turns anyway. The Commando 2D is great, and I can't even complain about the side torsos containing ammunition because if you're taking internal hits on a light mech, you're probably not long for the world anyway. Go wild. This is fine. This is all fine. It was a smaller model, a Commando they called it. They make them on Coventry, and I'm told it's one of the lightest machines they still use in the LAAF today. Anyway, I just have to say, even though it was described like the run to the litter, there's a genuine thrill in piloting a walker that moves with such fluidity. I've heard the mech warriors talk about how much more refined and flexible their rides were compared to the civilian variety, but until I put that commie through its paces, I didn't believe it. I tell you, it was like learning to drive on an old farm tractor, and then being handed the keys to a hurricane wind racer with all of the options. Well, except in this case, there are also missile launchers and lasers mounted on it to blow your way through the typical Donegal City gridlock. The Quest for Jardine, page 179 and 180, by Herbert A. Bees. Deployment across Lyran-held systems was extensive, and they guarded their new 25-ton wonder weapon jealously. Attempts by the SLDF to procure the Commando were stonewalled and delayed, which proved to be a rather savvy strategy considering how the Star League worked out. As a result, the Commando largely remained a Lyran and later FedCom battlemech throughout the Succession Wars. From most accounts, the Commando was a clear success. It wasn't without its drawbacks, specifically that SRM ammunition on each side torso, but we've already covered that. Some complained about the 3 different weapon systems, preferring a more streamlined dual or single weapon setup. However, as much as they did complain, the overwhelming feedback was positive. Production ramped up and stayed there, as it seemed the demand for the Commando had no limit. In one after-action special award commendation, a brother and sister mechwarrior team known as Duane and Synth Tomani that worked as scouts for the Winfield's Guards were noted for their achievement in 3011. Put to work on Severin scouting during a Draconis Combine assault, the Tomani's unit was destroyed in an unexpected strike. The siblings survived, though were forced to travel by night in their damaged commandos in hope of finding friendly forces. Eventually, linking up with the 2nd Donegal Guards, the 2 commando pilots volunteered to scout for the Lyran forces, even though their mechs were not in any state to continue. It's said that from that point on, the scouts for Winfield's brigade wore green tartan stripe pins on their lapels to honor Synth and Duane's honorable act for the Donegal Guards. Another interesting tale of Commando shenanigans comes to us from the 14th Lyran Guards, specifically a mech warrior named Seychelle Milladou, who must have been part harbor seal because she earned a reputation for piloting her commando into water for cover as often as possible. She even painted her mech sea green to further enhance the effect. With just the communications antenna jutting out above the surface of the water, Milladou could pinpoint enemy positions, movement, and when the opportunity arose, leap from the water to spray some poor unsuspecting enemy with short-range missiles. Paired commandos became the norm across Lyran units as their combined firepower could overwhelm light and even medium mechs that sought to get in their way. The Combine responded by using their Panthers to pelt the commandos at range and then used the mech's jump jets to avoid letting the Lyrans close in to return fire. I smiled because Treat couldn't see it. This ride came off the Coventry Metalworks line in 2875. It's seen action in the Commonwealth, and the Combine even fought against the clans. It's been blown to scrap at least twice and rebuilt at least 3 times. Last time was here about 50 years ago. Woman who left it to be rebuilt never returned to the shop, never paid for the repairs, so my family took possession. My grandfather drove it till he traded up for something better. Now I use it. So you're saying they inherit their machines? Mechs aren't things you just buy off the rack. A Night to Forget, Shrapnel number 20, page 213 by Michael A. Stackpole. Though there were many field refits and hatchet jobs done to the Commando during the First and Second Succession Wars, the Variant train really didn't leave the station until the early 31st century. To the machine's benefit, they made up for lost time with quite a few upgrades, side grades, and even a few questionable ones I'd argue border on downgrades. The first we're going to hit is the Commando 1B, which debuted in 2015. It was a partial return to the original version of the mech as it carried a large laser in the right arm. Unlike its predecessor, the 1B was also armed with a standard medium laser in the left arm and an SRM-2 launcher in the center torso, fed by 1 ton of ammunition in the left torso. At this point, the laser heating issue was a distant memory, and it could now reach out to mid-range for that reliable 8 damage. The major drawback for the machine was the 10 standard heat sinks, which made alpha strikes more painful for the Mechwarrior than in the Commando 2D. In addition to that harsher heat curve, the total possible damage from an alpha strike dropped to just 17. While it's true that 8 of that is pinpoint and not relying upon missiles, some felt it wasn't a good deal and stuck to their 2Ds. In 3018, the numbering scheme starts to get a little wacky with the Commando 7X. Structurally, it didn't have any changes from the earlier mechs, but it did seek to streamline the system's loadout with just a pair of weapon types. An SRM-6 launcher dominated the center torso along with 2 tons of ammunition split between the side torsos. Backing up that heavy hitter were a trio of standard medium lasers, 2 in the right arm and 1 in the left. As it turned out, the entire 7 series of Commandos were refits to suit the needs of different mercenary units that frequently worked with the Lyran Commonwealth. We will cover several more as we progress down the timeline, but it's worth noting that many of these were one-of type refits rather than entire production runs. We'll get into the Blazing Infernos and Hansen's Rough Riders when appropriate. A Hunter Commando charged the Hauptmann from the other side, firing a volley of short-range missiles at the heavier mech. Several struck Schaefer's mech, doing little damage, but the Hauptmann spun and unleashed everything at the lighter mech. Most of the volley struck the trees or fell short. Shirosky fired again.
"Slitter, back off! I've got him!"
13's PPC and large laser smashed or melted away more of the Hauptmann's armor. The Commando danced to the right and fired its laser at Schaefer, leaving a glowing scar on the assault mech's leg. Laws Are Silent, Shrapnel number 3, page 61 by Craig A. Reed, Jr. 2 years later, in 3020, the Inner Sphere was graced with what has to be one of the worst Commando refits in history. Someone, unclear who, decided it would be a good idea to cram an AC-2 autocannon into the right arm of a Commando. This allowed the 1C to pelt targets for 2 damage at very long range, but with very little else going on. The left arm-mounted medium laser was just sort of there, likely not doing much as this is a Commando that you really don't want anywhere near an enemy in short range. Even the lightest and most harmless of battle mechs could outdamage this thing. The 1C makes me sad. Let's just move on. Commando variants start to get interesting again in 3025 with the introduction of the Commando 3A, which embraces the fire with the installation of a flamer into the right arm. The bulk of the mech's damage was dished out by a pair of SRM-6s that fed from a single ton of ammunition in the right torso. Finally, a standard medium laser in the left arm finished off the refit. I don't have anything bad to say about the Flamer. It's a great weapon for light mechs for a variety of reasons like cooking infantry, battle armor, light vehicles, and reaching perfect meatloaf internal temperature. The heat generation for the 3A was a minor concern, but the biggest complaint had to be from the single ton of ammunition for the 2 SRM-6 launchers. From the start of a battle, the 3A was on a timer, and each of those volleys had to count. We joke about light mech warriors living short but glorious lives, but this may be too much even for that mindset. Also in 3025, the 7 series returned with the infamous Blazing Inferno Commando, designated the COM-7Y2. There was a 7Y1, but it really isn't worth the bandwidth, so we're skipping over it. The 7Y2, however, carried an all-energy weapon loadout that absolutely deserved the nickname. Structurally, the only change was the addition of 1 more ton of armor, bringing the total to 5. The rest of the mech was stock except for the new loadout. Eschewing missiles entirely, the Blazing Inferno carried 4 standard medium lasers scattered over the left arm, right torso, and head open criticals. Their reliable short-range damage was further supplemented through the addition of 6 standard small lasers, 2 set in each leg and the last pair installed into the center torso. The prospect of being able to unleash all of these lasers onto a hapless target at close range had to be attractive, no matter the cost. The nickname Blazing Inferno had a dual meaning, not just as a description of what the target would look like after absorbing all of that laser energy, but also what the Commando's Mechwarrior would be feeling as the 10 standard heat sinks tried to bleed off the 20 heat generated by alpha striking while on the run. A bright side is that without all that ammunition to worry about cooking off, the fire and movement penalties might be worth the risk, that in that perfect moment when you see a mech absorb 38 damage and laser fire in that rear firing arc. I've heard lots of good things about the Commando 7Y2, and for a little 25-ton terror, I understand why. It's definitely worth a try sometime. Lombard's Commando unleashed a deadly wave of missiles as the vehicle started to move. One managed to find its way through the half-closed loading ramp, exploding inside with a sickening ka-whomp and a billow of dark smoke. For the infantry that had clambered aboard, there was no hope. The other missiles devastated the top armor of the hovercraft, leaving plates peeled back and smoke billowing from several holes. The driver tried to make a break for it, but Lombard would have nothing of it. He charged up along its side and delivered a devastating kick that mangled the vehicle's hoverskirt, kicking up a cloud of smoke. No Substitute for Victory, page 105, by Blaine Lee Pardoe. Though the Commando was joined by many other light mechs over the hundreds of years of fighting across the inner sphere, it retained an important position within the Lyran military units. Even after the incorporation of the Davions into the newly forged Federated Commonwealth, its production on Coventry continued. It wasn't long before the Davion units that contained Valkyries were shipped new commandos to bolster their tactical flexibility. Entire generations of mechwarriors across the inner sphere were introduced to the cult of Commando. The reintroduction of Star League-era technology made it an easy decision at Coventry to take a fresh look at the tried-and-true Commando. The design team looked at the obvious vulnerabilities and tried to address them while not sacrificing the essence of 25 tons of missiles and fire. The resulting Commando 5S marched off the assembly lines in 3050, just in time for all heck to break loose in the Federated Commonwealth, first with the Clan invasion and then with Civil War. The COM-5S was given significant structural upgrades which highlighted just how high value it was for the Federated Commonwealth. The Foundation ultralight endosteel frame dropped the structure down to just 1.25 tons, and though the engine remained the same, the 4 tons of standard armor was upgraded to 3 tons of Lexington Limited high-grade ferrofibrous armor. Though this was a slight downgrade of the mech's overall armor coverage, the extra ton of mass shaved off with the use of ferrofibrous was considered worth it for use elsewhere. The 10 single heat sinks were untouched, and that left a whopping 10 tons of the Commando's mass free for weapons and equipment. The weapons loadout was a nod toward tradition, but with upgraded elements. The center torso-mounted SRM-6, for example, benefited from an Artemis IV fire control system installed into the mech's head. This helped make sure that when the moment came for the Commando to dump its fire into a target and run, more of those SRMs would impact and do their work. Backing up the big launcher, a Coventry T4H SRM-2 rack was installed into the right arm and fed by a single ton of ammunition in the right torso. That side was given case to protect both the ammunition supplies. Finally, a good old Defiance B3M medium laser was set into the left arm to do its quality work for another generation. The Commando 5S received just what it needed to continue being relatively useful in the post-Helm Memory Core inner sphere. Of course, times would get tough with the arrival of pulse lasers, but nothing short of ECM and an even more advanced tech would help any light mechs moving forward. It's interesting to note that as we do move further down the timeline, the Lyran stranglehold on Commando production would gradually loosen. Specifically among the Periphery states, both the Taurian Concordat and Marian Hegemony would set up their own Commando production lines. The Taurians produced the Commando 2D at the Ilyushin-based Vandenberg Mechanized Industries, and the Marians produced a feisty 4H variant, which we will cover in a little bit. The 3050s were filled with more refits in that 7 series that tinkered with the basic medium laser SRM combos, sometimes adding case, a Beagle active probe, or other assorted goodies made possible thanks to the use of endo steel. One I do want to highlight arrived in 3056 and was designated the Commando 7J. I bring it up because somebody finally slapped a bunch of jump jets on the thing and went to town. The 7J had a 695 movement profile and carried 2 SRM4s split between the right arm and center torso. They each fed from a single ton of case-protected ammunition in the right torso. A medium laser in the left arm finished off the build. While this significantly improved the Commando's agility, the continued use of just 10 single heat sinks made leaping that full 5 hexes on jump jets a toasty affair if you're shooting at the same time. Mech warriors, be wary, but still have fun. The Commando, despite being more lightly armored, darted toward the center of the factory floor. Its feet struck sparks from the ferrocrete, scratching long white scars on it. The mech brought both arms up, launching missiles from the right and firing a medium laser with the left. A second flight of missiles, jetting from over its heart, linked the 2 mechs. The missiles scattered damage over the Panther. Each exploded like a gaudy firework, looking more spectacular than the harm caused. Shards of fiberglass flew, scouring the shielding and glittering on the floor. The laser's incarnadine beam slashed across the Panther's chest, cutting the number 16 in half. Not the Way the Smart Money Bets, page 42, by Michael A. Stackpole. Kicking off the 3060s with a new refit, the Commando 7S reflected the inevitable production of the Lyran-produced light fusion engine technology. The brand new engine was wrapped in endosteel, and finally the mech's 10 single heatsinks were upgraded to the double-strength variety. If you're curious why it took so long, only 6 of the heatsinks can be held in the 150 fusion engine, so 4 bulky double heatsinks just gobble up critical hit locations like Mech Frog eating Piroshki at Crossroads Mall. Additionally, in a surprising move, a half-ton was shaved off the traditional 4 tons of standard plate, leaving only 56 points of protection. The Commando 7S's primary weapons had to be considered the 2 ER medium lasers set into the left arm. They were backed up at short range by an SRM-4 in the center torso, aided by an Artemis IV fire control system. Finally, a pair of Streak SRM-2 launchers were set into the right arm. All 3 missile systems fed from a ton of the appropriate ammunition set into the case-protected right torso. The Commando 7S is a powerful machine, and the light engine does good work in helping it get where it needs to be to unleash the little 25 tons of fury. It's small, but it's fierce. The only regret I have for it is the very light armor, which feels quite unforgiving. If I were to tinker with it, I think I might sacrifice that Artemis system in favor of an additional ton of armor. 3062 was a banner year for the Commando 7 series household thanks to the introduction of the 7T refit named the Blazing Inferno 2. It was a nod toward the original, though this time it benefited from endosteel, 11 double heat sinks, triple strength myomer, and 5 tons of standard plate armor. Besides the boost to physical attacks, which of course is why most people love the TSM, it could also boost the 7T's movement profile up to 711-0 when warm and toasty. To help it get there, 4 ER medium lasers were scattered over the mech, 1 in each arm, 1 in the right torso, and the last one set in the open head critical location. Emotional support ER medium laser? Sure, why not? To add third-degree burns to insult, 5 ER small lasers sat in the same locations from the original Blazing Inferno, -1 from the center torso. That last center torso location was reserved for a standard small laser. Either the tech didn't order enough, or they just wanted to keep 1 small laser around to make sure they could generate 1 extra heat if needed. The Blazing Inferno 2 is a nasty little bugger, much like its predecessor, though the learning curve anytime you add triple strength myomer to something is going to be a bit steeper. However, with a little practice, you too can run around the battlefield like your hair is on fire. In 3064, the Marian Hegemony produced their first commandos in the form of an upgraded 2D model designated the COM-4H. The Periphery designers just have 0 chill, so that 4H is packed with rocket launchers, because of course it is. 6 rocket launcher 15 racks, to be specific, scattered across the 2 side torsos and right arm. Besides the rockets, the only other weaponry was a pair of standard medium lasers set into the left arm. In a theoretical Alpha Strike scenario, the Commando 4H could rain down 90 damage worth of rockets and 10 more damage worth of medium laser shots on a target. This, of course, is a high-risk, high-reward scenario, as you're only going to get one chance with the rockets, they have that +1 to hit penalty, and the mech is going to be 22 plus heat afterwards, which includes the -4 movement penalty, +3 modifier to fire, and a shutdown risk avoided with an A+ roll. For those who have a high risk tolerance and don't care about their light mech warriors, the Commando 4H could possibly take out a target much heavier than itself. Or you could maybe just not fire all the rockets at the same time, but that's pretty boring. It was reported that the Taurians refit some of their commandos to the 4H model before their run-in with Hansen's Rough Riders in the late 3060s. This pitted the Rough Riders 7 Series mechs against the Taurians 2Ds and 4Hs. When the rockets were still plentiful, the Taurians had a firepower edge. However, once the supply ran low, the Rough Riders were able to overwhelm the Taurians with their energy weapon heavy builds. There's probably a lesson to be learned here, but let's just go ahead and not learn it. No matter. Alex Carlyle was caught now in battlefield madness, a wild and unreasoning berserker's lust that drove him on, unthinking, heedless of the enemy's greater numbers or his own mech's weakness. He heard a full-throated scream of pure raw fury sounding over his neurohelmet's comm receivers, and it was seconds before he recognized the shriek as his own war cry. Continuing his wild charge, he crashed at full speed into the battered commando with a mighty clash of steel on ringing steel. The commando, outweighed almost 3-to-1 by the Legion Archer, hit the ground flat on its back with a jolting crash, its fall throwing up a pall of roiling dust. Alex paused, triggering a third missile barrage, clearing the last of his right side tubes with a point-blank volley into the assassin advancing from the right, before slamming one huge armored foot down on the commando's torso. Tactics of Duty, page 6, by William H. Keith, Jr. 3068 turned out to be an eventful year for Coventry Metalworks when the word of Blake jumped into system and decided the company and entire planet needed to be under new management. The Blakist engineers looked at the existing Commando 7S production line and decided it needed a revamp. The resulting Commando 7B was built with endosteel around a light fusion engine, and the mass savings was spent on 4.5 tons of standard plate armor, 4 jump jets, and its weapons systems. Additionally, a small cockpit was used for a reason I can't quite sort out. There are still plenty of critical locations left in the mech, so perhaps the Blakist designers just hated tall people. The new 694 movement profile is nice, and once you get where you're going, the rest of the loadout packed a good wallop. The longest range weapon was an ER medium laser installed into the left arm. Once the 7B can close in on its prey, twin SRM-4 launchers in the center torso can do their good work, chewing on ammunition stored in a case-protected right torso. The fun really begins at extremely close range once the 7B can employ the 2 left arm mounted flamers. They're useful for messing up the plans of heavy energy build battle mechs, or cooking infantry, or mimes, whatever, no one's watching, go wild. One notable Commando mech warrior earned a name for himself as a member of the native Coventry resistance during the Word of Blake kerfuffle. Hauptmann Larry Schuster wasn't actually a dedicated commando pilot, but ended up one after being dispossessed twice from heavier mechs during the conflict. Running around in a battered but functional Commando 7S he nicknamed Gloria, Schuster acted as a resistance raider with his company throughout 3069. Unfortunately, he disappears from the historical record in late 3071 when it was recorded that he led his unit on a raid against a Blakist POW camp near the ruins of Port Lawrence. Short but glorious lives, remember? Maybe he made it through and lived a quiet and peaceful life out on a farm. Before we take a leap into the mid-3070s, we do need to talk about the Commando 7S2, sometimes referred to as the Freyr refit. We've recently visited Hunter's Paradise in a previous video on dangerous creatures of the BattleTech universe, and here we are again dropping down onto its surface of dangerous megafauna. However, instead of talking about dinosaurs and giant carnivorous bugs, we need to address V. Freyr, who worked briefly as a Mechwarrior guide for the wealthy tourists who jumped into the system looking to shoot some big game. Freyr earned his experience as a Mechwarrior within the Lyran Arcturian Guards, but ended up deserting from his unit in the wake of the Fedcom Civil War. Finding work in the Periphery with his possibly pilfered Commando 7S, Freyr could often be found leading his usually deluded clients out into the Badlands of Hunter's Paradise, chasing down one rare creature or another. Unfortunately for his clients, these trips were very often deadly. Following at least 16 separate incidents of hunters going missing and not returning from their treks, it didn't take Sherlock Holmes to note that each time Freyr and his commando were out on the excursion. Often, if the wreckage of the hunting parties could be found, valuable parts were stripped out of the machines. It was inferred that Freyr was pulling parts and looting valuables to continually upgrade his battle mech to the detriment of anyone unlucky enough to pay him for his services. Of course, by this time, Zvi Freyr had fled the system. The COM 7S2 was structurally very different from any previous commando. It was built from endosteel but carried a 150 extra light fusion engine, an extra light gyro, and was protected by 7 tons of advanced hardened armor. The small cockpit, 10 double heat sinks, and 6 jump jets polished off the structural upgrades, or possibly side grades depending upon your thoughts about such things. The Freyr commando carried 2 Clan-Spec ER medium lasers in the left arm and 2 Clan-Spec Streak SRM-4 launchers in the right arm, fed by a single ton of ammunition in the case-protected right torso. It's a little difficult to sort out just how practical the 7S2 commando would be. Obviously it's tougher externally than other commandos, but once you crack that armor, that XL engine and XL gyro expose the significant vulnerability. Obviously the Clan-Spec weaponry is impressive and valuable if used as an ambusher. No one wants to get hit in the back with 8 Streak SRMs and a pair of Clan ER medium lasers. That'll leave a mark. Wherever Freyr ended up, let's hope he's not using that commando to terrorize the locals. His sensor readouts recorded the strike, and the BDA analysis scrolled across the top of his heads-up display. To a commando which relied upon speed rather than armor for protection, the effects of such heavy damage could have been devastating. The computer's best estimate showed that the target mech had taken at least 12 direct hits in the upper torso, enough to tear through the armor and into the internal structure. Whether or not the attack had disabled the mech, the machine was certainly hurting. Alex smiled grimly, one less flanker to worry about. Blood of Heroes, page 7, by Andrew Keith. Hopping forward to 3075, our next commando arrived sporting the distinction of being one of the few versions of the mech that could participate in long-range combat. It shouldn't be a surprise that a mech designated the COM-2DR was built off of the original 2D variant, including a standard structure, 10 single heat sinks, and 4 tons of standard armor. In fact, until you get to the loadout, it's the same machine. The ER medium laser in the left arm was the primary damage dealer, but it was backed up by a multi-missile 7 launcher set into the opposite arm that fed from 2 tons of case-protected ammunition in the right torso. With 2 tons of ammo, one of them could be LRMs, which allowed the commando to be a pain at all ranges. Heat isn't an issue, and there's still a reasonable punch close up with the equivalent of an SRM-7 and an ER medium laser. Worth a try? I don't know. What do you think? This leads us to the most recent entries in the Commando pantheon of variants as we cross over into the 32nd century. The COM 8S benefited from endosteel, a larger 175 XL fusion engine, 10 double heat sinks, and 4.5 tons of standard plate armor. That 711-0 movement profile could be further boosted to 714 with the center torso mounted supercharger unit. The more powerful engine limited the loadout somewhat, but it still carried a pair of ER medium lasers in the left arm and 2 Streak SRM-2s in the right, fed by a single ton of ammunition in the Case 2 protected right torso. Finally, a C3 boosted computer was installed into the left torso to participate in that network. This speedier commando is neat, but risks negating the primary draw of the machine, which was to pack a hard punch. While the 8S has some good elements, it strays a bit too far from the original's charm. Of course, once we discuss the 9S, we may want to come back and revisit this. Hopping down to 3146, the most recent commando variant is that 9S, and it structurally isn't different from the previous entry except for the weapons loadout. The more powerful engine is there along with the supercharger and 4.5 tons of armor. Instead of going with a more traditional loadout, a light PPC and a pair of multi-missile 3 launchers make up the mech's primary weaponry. The 2 tons of Case 2 protected ammunition allow the use of both LRMs and SRMs, which does provide some flexibility. Additionally, that light PPC can do its 5 damage out to 18 hexes. Unfortunately, the 3 hex minimum range for the PPC has to be considered for the Commando's Mechwarrior if they want to use the mech for a more traditional fight. The final 2 additions to the battle mech were a pair of improved one-shot SRM-2s set into the right arm. These could function as a panic button damage boost when the time is right. My criticism for the AS applies to the 9S as well. While the 9S can function as a long-range pest, it gives up the short-range punch which has defined the platform for centuries. As much as I might complain about it, reports suggest the 9N has been effective in its role as a skirmisher. In 3147, when the Florida Timbuktu Theater militia clashed with a local warlord named Diego Widmer and Ayacucho, the TMM found themselves in a prolonged campaign where neither side was willing to push for a quick resolution. This allowed the 9S and other mechs designed to pelt targets from long distances to demonstrate their worth. I'm willing to concede that the variant could have its uses. I'm just unimpressed by that use because I'm just a big old jerk. Vandergriff saw figures darting across the deck of the hub's cargo bay deck, taking enormous bounding leaps as they used the hub's 1/10 G to their advantage. He raised his left arm and triggered the laser mounted on the wrist, picking off one of the figures in mid-flight. The low spin gravity and the tendency to go airborne could be a disadvantage in combat as well as a plus. He held off on firing missiles. The attacking troops were widely scattered across the breadth and depth of the cargo bay, and it didn't make sense to use one missile on one soldier. But the enemy was under no such constraint. 2 SRMs snapped through the air on long drawn-out white contrails and slammed into his commando. A Rock and a Hard Place, page 338, by William H. Keith. Stepping back on the timeline a few hundred years, we couldn't do the Commando justice without discussing its connection to the SLDF and the clans. While we previously covered that the Lyrans did their best to slow walk and even stonewall the procurement of the Commando by the SLDF, their efforts were not completely successful. Eventually, the mech did show up in the Star League ranks, specifically the 438th Battle Mech Division of the 13th Army. The 438th was filled with Lyrans who mostly piloted heavy and assault battle mechs. However, a full company of commandos and their mech warriors served as division scouts. Good for you, little guy. During the Ameris coup and subsequent civil war, more commandos filled the SLDF ranks, when Lyran mech warriors joined the SLDF out of frustration following House Steiner's dithering. As a result, the commando was represented in Alexander Kerensky's Exodus fleet that disappeared into the periphery. Through happenstance and perhaps Kerensky's divine protection, commandos survived through the initial conflict on the Pentagon Worlds and Operation Klondike when the newborn clans returned with a vengeance. Eventually, new commandos were produced by Clan Smoke Jaguar and Goliath Scorpion. It was the Scorpions who used the aging mech as a basis for a new design designated the Commando IIC, which was first produced in 2856. This entirely new Clan-Tech version of the mech benefited from endosteel, a standard 150 fusion engine, and 4.5 tons of standard plate armor. The 10 double heat sinks were clan grade and nestled in the mech's legs and side torsos. The biggest impact from the upgraded tech was the weapons loadout, which vastly increased the battle mech's offensive power over its inner sphere original. 2 Clan ER medium lasers were installed into the arm to give the 2C a solid mid-range punch, but the bulk of the damage was reserved for short range, where 3 short-range missile 4-racks and 1 SRM-6 could be fired all at once to bathe the target with up to 36 damage. Adding in the 2 ER medium lasers would push that total possible damage to 50, doubling the mech's weight in damage is not too shabby. The 2 major drawbacks for the design were the rough heat generation that an Alpha Strike could generate and the lack of ammunition for those SRM-4s. All 3 of the launchers fed from just a single ton of ammunition in the case-protected right torso. While not a Rockstar 2C like the Warhammer or Marauder, the Commando 2C stood as a good reminder that clan missile launchers shouldn't be underestimated. Reports demonstrate that the Commando 2C performed well for the Scorpions who used it to quickly hammer targets and fade back before a proper response could be assembled. Classic Commando, love it. On Tokasha in 2872, the Scorpions used the 2C on a raid against the Hell's Horses, which yielded valuable genetic material. As great as the Commando 2C was, it suffered the same fate as many of the other 2C designs with the rise of the Omnimech. By the late 2800s, the Commando 2C was seen only among freebirth units tasked with second-line duty or hunting down bandit caste enclaves. Thankfully for the fans of the battlemech, it never really went extinct with the Goliath Scorpion Tumen. It even earned the nickname Sucker Punch, which seems fitting. Before we wrap this all up, my unchained hubris and ego demand I attempt to tweak the Commando to my liking with a totally unofficial and non-canon build. I decided to go all the way back to the Commando 5S for inspiration and began ripping out cables and myomer. I present to you the Commando 5MF. Though technically it is a mixed inner sphere clan hybrid, there's only one piece of Clan-Spec technology on it. The 5MF benefits from endosteel, a light fusion engine, and an extra light gyro to free up a little mass for its toys, and a slightly bulked up 4 tons of light ferrofibrous armor. It carries double heat sinks, which are a good investment, not just because it keeps the mech well away from any overheating issues, but also because they provide a nice critical hit buffer on the side torsos. It's much better to lose a heat sink to a critical than to take an engine hit. The weapons loadout is pretty simple, with 3 short-range missile racks set into the left arm, which feed from 2 tons of case-protected ammunition in the left torso. The Clan-Spec medium pulse laser is just there to keep the roofing and window salesmen away. No, I don't believe you're in the neighborhood already, and no, I don't think you have a special deal for me. To aid you in your adventures, I went ahead and made 1 ton of the SRM ammunition Inferno rounds on the totally free PDF record sheet found in the link down in the video notes. If you want to give the variant a try, please let me know how it does. So why do we love the Commando? It's an interesting question to ponder, as I'm incredibly biased toward it. From the original Duane Luce rendition to the latest Ill-Clan version by Anthony Scroggins, I'd argue it's difficult not to root for this little 25-ton monster. If mech warriors and light battle mechs lived short but glorious lives, you might as well have a mech that can hit hard and leave a mark rather than gamble on sticking around for 4 or 5 bites at the apple. The recently canonized 7 Series Commandos are a nice addition to the pantheon of variants, and there seems to be a Commando for every taste. The Helm Memory Core 5S is strong, and that can't be taken for granted. At least they didn't try to cram an ER large laser onto it, right? It's a plucky little underdog battle mech, and I'll happily take it over most other Inner Sphere lights. However, I'm curious what you think. Is the Commando a mech that makes your lists, or do you prefer your Stingers, Locust, Valkyries, or even a Jenner? Let me know what you think in the video comments, and we'll keep the discussion going. As we progress through the last of the original 3025 mechs over the next few months, I'm curious what newer mechs you'd like to see get the limelight. Interests in battle mechs tend to wane a little bit after 3055, but if there's one you're particularly passionate about, I'd like to know. Thanks as always for coming out today. If you think the video deserves it and you want to show your support, the easiest way to do that is to hit that like and subscribe button. You could even leave a comment. All those things make that YouTube algorithm happy. If you want to go one step further, direct support through Ko-fi or a YouTube channel membership is a great way to help ensure the nonsense keeps flowing. Just a couple of bucks a month can make a big difference. I can't do this without you, and I really appreciate it. With all that, I'll say thanks again for coming out, for all the great photos shared this week from the Discord community. We've had quite a few new submitters this month, and showing off the cool mech paint jobs has become one of my favorite parts of doing what I do. With that, I'll say have a great week, please take care, and go out and make the world a slightly better place today and tomorrow.